My sister threw a housewarming party on the same day as my daughter's funeral and called it a minor event. I wish I could say that was the worst part. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Maren Hale. A few months ago, my life completely fell apart. My daughter, Ellie, was only 8 years old when a car accident took her from me. 1 minute she was singing along to a silly song in the back seat, and the next, I was standing in a hospital room holding her tiny hand, trying to understand how the world could still be turning without her in. The days after her death blurred together. I barely slept, barely ate. All I wanted was to give her a peaceful goodbye. I started planning the funeral, even though every step felt like cutting myself open. I called my sister, Laura, hoping she'd be there for me like I'd always been there for her. We'd grown up close, or at least I thought we had. I was the one who watched her kids when she needed help, the one who stayed up late listening to her talk about her dreams. When I told Laura about the funeral, she sounded distracted. She said, "Oh wow, that's sad. By the way, we finally got the keys to our new house. We're doing the housewarming party next Saturday." I froze. That was the exact day I had planned for Ellie's service. I thought maybe she didn't realize it, so I said softly, "Laura, that's the same day as the funeral." She sighed like I was being difficult and said, "Oh, come on, Maren. It's not a big deal. You can't expect everyone to drop everything for such a minor event." Minor event. Those words stuck in my head like a blade. My daughter's funeral, the day I was going to say goodbye to the only person who had ever made me feel whole, was a minor event to my own sister. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor that night, staring at Ellie's drawings on the fridge. I thought about all the times I had shown up for Laura, when her marriage was falling apart, when she needed money, when she needed someone to watch her kids. I never once said no. And now, when I needed her most, she couldn't even move her party. I told her I understood, but I didn't. I still went ahead with the funeral. I stood there in front of Ellie's small coffin, trying to say goodbye while my phone buzzed with messages from people sending me photos, not of flowers or condolences, but of Lara's housewarming. Laughter, champagne, decorations, smiles. All while I stood in black, burying my child. That was the moment something inside me changed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just went quiet, because I knew this was only the beginning, and one day, Lara would finally understand what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. When I was a kid, it was always clear who the favorite was. Lara had a way of shining, and everyone made sure she kept the spotlight. I learned early to step aside, to be the helper, the one who made things easier for everyone else. I thought that was love, being useful. During the days leading up to the funeral, those old habits came back without me even noticing. I answered calls, signed papers, spoke to the pastor, and tried to make sure everything was perfect for Ellie's last day. Lara stopped by once, wearing a bright yellow dress that didn't fit the mood at all. She walked through my kitchen, tapping the counter and saying, "You know, my new place has marble tops. Real marble, not laminate like this." I stared at her, not sure how to respond. She looked around like she was already bored and said she couldn't stay long. She had to pick out tiles for her guest bathroom. I wanted to tell her to leave, but the words stuck in my throat. I still couldn't believe how little she cared. Later that night, I called our mother. I told her how Lara had acted, how it felt like I was grieving alone. Mom sighed and said, "Honey, that's just how your sister is. You know she doesn't mean anything by it. She's excited about her house. Try to be happy for her." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Be happy for her. My daughter was gone, and my mother wanted me to be happy for a kitchen renovation. It reminded me of when we were little, when Lara would get straight A's and Mom would throw her a party, but when I got the same grades, she'd just pat my head and say, "That's nice, dear." As I worked on the final arrangements, Lara kept sending messages about her party plan. She even sent a photo of her kitchen with the caption, "Can't wait for everyone to see it." I stopped replying. Every word from her felt like salt rubbed into an open wound. The day before the funeral, Mom came over to help with flowers. She moved around the living room quietly, then said, "You shouldn't let this tear you and your sister apart. Family is all we have." Her tone made it sound like I was the one causing trouble. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just nodded and kept trimming stems. That night, I sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by framed photos. Ellie's smile, Lara's graduation, family holidays. I noticed something for the first time. In every picture, I was off to the side, holding something for someone else. A bag, a coat, a child. Always the one helping, never the one being seen. It was a small thing, but it told me everything. My family hadn't changed. I had just been too blinded by love to see it before. The morning came gray and heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. I moved through it without feeling much of anything. My dress felt too tight, the air too thick. People filled the small church, faces I barely recognized offering quiet hugs and empty words. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded when they said things like, "She's in a better place." I didn't know what that meant anymore. The service started, and the soft music echoed through the walls. I kept my eyes on the little white coffin at the front. I thought I would cry, but nothing came. I felt hollow, as if everything human inside me had been scraped out. When the pastor spoke Ellie's name, my knees almost gave out, but I stayed standing, my hand gripping the pew so hard my knuckles ached. Afterward, people gathered outside, murmuring to each other, holding paper cups of coffee. I heard someone say, "Can you believe Lara's party is today?" Poor timing. I froze, staring at the gravel beneath my shoes. I had almost forgotten, or maybe I had tried to. I told myself she must have canceled it, that no one could possibly be that cruel. Then my phone buzzed. I thought it was another condolence message. Instead, it was from Nora, a family friend who had been close to both of us since high school. She wrote, "You're missing such a great party," and sent a string of photos before realizing her mistake. I opened them. Bright lights. Balloons shaped like gold stars. A table covered in food and champagne flutes. My sister stood in the center of the crowd, wearing a silver dress, smiling wide. Behind her, I could see our mother laughing beside the new neighbors. Someone had even hung a sign that read, "Welcome home, Lara." The sound of laughter carried faintly through the church walls from a block away. It was surreal. Two gatherings happening almost side by side, one full of mourning, the other of celebration. The world didn't care that they clashed. I walked outside into the cold air, pretending to check my phone again, just so I wouldn't have to look at anyone. I could hear the faint beat of music carried on the wind. It didn't sound distant enough. Each note crawled under my skin until my hands started shaking. A woman from church touched my shoulder gently and asked if I was all right. I nodded again, but I wasn't. Something dark was growing inside me, quiet and deliberate. I didn't go to the reception afterward. I went home, sat in silence, and stared at the photo still open on my phone. My sister's smile, her glass raised high. My grief shifted shape that day. It stopped feeling like pain and started feeling like purpose. Something inside me whispered that Lara had taken enough from me, and one day, I would make sure she felt the same emptiness she left me with. The weeks that followed felt endless. The house was too quiet, the walls closing in a little more each day. I stopped setting the table for two. I stopped checking the mail. The flowers people had brought began to wilt, but I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. They filled the living room with the smell of something sweet turning sour. Lara didn't come by. Not once. There were no calls, no messages asking how I was doing. The only sound from her side of town came through neighborhood gossip. Talk about her parties, her new curtains, the perfect shade of blue she'd picked for her guest room. She seemed to be living in another world entirely, one where my daughter had never existed. Mom called sometimes, but the conversations were short and heavy. She'd start with a sigh and end with advice I didn't ask for. "You have to keep living, Marin," she'd say. "It's not healthy to dwell." When I told her that I wasn't ready, she said, "People lose children every day. You can't let it ruin your life." I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. It was clear she didn't want to talk about Ellie at all. The bills stacked up on the counter. Funeral costs, hospital fees, utilities. They just kept coming. I tried to go back to work, but the office felt foreign, like a place that belonged to someone else. I'd sit at my desk and stare at the same email for hours. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon and said he understood what I was going through, but the company needed stability. I nodded, though I barely heard him. My mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere far quieter. Nights were the hardest. The silence was thick, almost physical. I'd wake up expecting to hear Ellie's soft footsteps in the hallway, the click of her nightlight turning on. When the house stayed dark, I'd pull the blanket over my face and count the seconds until morning. Then one afternoon the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. It was Lara. Her voice was bright, almost cheerful. "Hey sis, I've been meaning to call. Things have been crazy lately. House stuff, the kids, you know how it is." I waited for her to ask how I was holding up, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "Listen, could you watch the boys this weekend? Grant's got a work thing, and I really need a break." I didn't speak at first. I could hear her tapping her nails against something, waiting. It was like she was calling any babysitter, not her sister who'd just buried her child. Finally, I said, "You want me to babysit?" She laughed lightly. "You've always been so good with them." When the call ended, I sat staring at the phone in my hand. The hurt didn't feel sharp anymore. It was quiet, steady, almost calm. Something inside me shifted, a slow and certain crack. I realized then, I was done being the one everyone leaned on. I said yes to Lara without thinking it through. The words slipped out too easily. Maybe she took my calm voice as forgiveness. Maybe she thought time had softened me. It hadn't. I agreed because I wanted to see her world up close, the one she'd built on top of my grief. Saturday came, and I drove to her new neighborhood. The houses all looked the same: polished lawns, identical mailboxes, fake smiles behind expensive doors. Her house stood at the end of the street, painted a color that screamed for attention. I parked by the curb and sat for a minute, watching the sunlight bounce off the spotless windows. Lara greeted me at the door with a wide grin. She looked flawless, every hair in place, perfect makeup. "You'll love it here," she said, sweeping her hand toward the open floor plan. The air smelled like new paint and artificial flowers. I could almost hear the echo of my daughter's laughter in the empty corner. Her boys ran past me, shouting, leaving a trail of crumbs. Lara kept talking about the new furniture, the designer curtains, the neighbors who adored her style. Then she mentioned Grant, her husband. "He's been working late a lot," she said with a quick glance toward the stairs. "Big promotion coming." Her smile tightened as she said it. When Grant finally appeared, he looked tired, older than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes flicked toward Lara before he greeted me. "Thanks for helping out," he said quietly. I nodded, studying the small details, the way he rubbed the back of his neck, how his wedding ring seemed too loose. Something in his posture told me he was holding more than stress. After they left, I moved through the rooms slowly. The house felt staged, too perfect, as if it were meant to convince someone of a story that wasn't real. In the kitchen drawer, I noticed a pile of unopened bills, all stamped with red letters. On the counter sat an envelope from a bank, the kind people hide before guests arrive. That night, when Lara came back, her energy was forced. She talked about meeting the neighbors, how one of them drove a car worth more than her old house. I asked about Grant's new job, pretending to sound curious. She blinked, then said, "Oh, finance stuff, nothing exciting." Her voice cracked at the end. Over the next few weeks, she asked me to babysit again. Each time I learned more. The same bills kept piling up. Grant's promotion never materialized. I overheard her on the phone, whispering to someone about refinancing, about needing just a little more time. I started keeping notes, dates, details, amounts. I didn't know exactly what I was building, but I knew it mattered. Every word she'd said, every lie she told, became another brick in something I was quietly constructing. She thought I was just helping out. She had no idea I was watching her empire start to shake. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table waiting for Lara and Grant to return. A folder lay half open beside the fruit bowl. I hadn't meant to look, but the corner of a document caught my eye. It had Lara's handwriting all over it. Curiosity turned into stillness as I read. The numbers didn't match. The signatures were slightly different. There were copies of pay stubs for a job Grant didn't have. The truth settled slowly. She had forged papers to secure their mortgage. The house she bragged about wasn't built on wealth. It was built on lies. When they came home, she didn't notice the folder had shifted. She poured herself wine and started talking about her next big project, something about adding a deck. Grant didn't say a word. His face was pale, and his shoulders drooped like a man who'd already given up. A few days later, he called me. His voice was low, careful. "Can we talk?" We met at a quiet diner outside town. He looked thinner, the sharpness in his eyes replaced by exhaustion. Between sips of cold coffee, he admitted things I had already guessed. Lara had pushed them into debt, used his name for accounts he never approved. He said she spent hours each day trying to keep up the image she'd created. "She doesn't even see me anymore," he whispered. "All she sees is the life she thinks she deserves." I listened, letting him speak until he ran out of words. I told him about Ellie, about the silence, the emptiness, the way people had treated my grief like a problem to fix. For a long time, neither of us said anything. There was an understanding in the quiet. We were both tied to Lara in different ways, both carrying damage she had caused. When I drove home that night, the air felt different. The anger that had sat inside me for months began to change shape. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was control. I knew something that could shatter the world Lara had built. Over the next week, I gathered proof without making it obvious. I copied account statements while babysitting, took photos of her fake documents, and sent them to a secure folder. Each discovery made my pulse steady, not wild. Power can be calm when it's certain. Grant started calling more often, mostly to talk. He said he didn't know how much longer he could pretend. His words carried the weight of someone trapped in his own house. Once he asked quietly, "How did you survive losing everything?" I told him I hadn't. I'd just learned how to look like I had. He nodded, understanding too well. I realized then that Lara's secret wasn't just about money. It was about the way she lived, a lie dressed as perfection. And now that lie belonged to me. It started with a single envelope. I slipped it into a mailbox downtown, no return address, just a few photocopies and a short note typed on plain paper. Nothing dramatic, just enough to raise questions at the bank where Lara handled her accounts. I didn't have to say much. The forged numbers spoke for themselves. I imagined the moment someone in that office opened it, brows furrowing as they compared signatures. The thought didn't bring me joy exactly, but it steadied me. Days passed, then a week. Lara's usual messages about weekend plans stopped. Instead, she left short voicemails that sounded clipped, rushed. "Hey, things have been weird at work," she said in one. "Just call me back." I didn't. I let silence be my answer. While the storm grew behind the scenes, I turned my attention closer to home. Her new neighborhood adored gossip. I made sure they had plenty. A quiet word to the woman across the street about a designer handbag that wasn't real. A casual mention to the contractor at the hardware store about an unpaid invoice. It didn't take much. People love stories that make them feel superior. I simply gave them pieces of truth and let their imagination do the rest. Within 2 weeks, the image Lara had built began to crack. A neighbor stopped waving from her driveway. Another canceled an invite to her brunch. Someone posted an offhand comment about people living beyond their means. She must have seen it because she called me late one night, voice trembling. "I don't know what's happening," she said. "Everything's falling apart all at once." I sat on my couch in the dark, listening. She talked about how the bank wanted to review her paperwork, how her credit cards were frozen by mistake. I heard her breathing quicken, a sound somewhere between fear and disbelief. "You believe me, right?" she asked. I almost laughed, but managed to keep my tone even. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," I said softly. She exhaled, relieved. "You've always been the calm one," she said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words twisted like a knife and a gift at once. After we hung up, I stood by the window watching the empty street. Her world was beginning to shake, but she still thought I was her anchor. That was the beauty of it. She reached for me every time the ground shifted, never realizing I was the one moving it. I sent one more letter that week, this time to a local agency that oversaw housing loans. Again, nothing elaborate, just documents and a few highlighted lines. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The truth was enough to speak for me. Every lie she had told was beginning to surface, one ripple at a time. And I watched from the distance she had once forced between us, quiet and patient, as the perfect life she'd stolen began to collapse under its own weight. Mom insisted on a family dinner. "It's been too long," she said, as if time could smooth over the jagged edges between us. I agreed, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted to see Lara's face, to look directly at what I'd built beneath her feet. The restaurant was one of her favorites, all soft lighting and polite waiters. Lara arrived last, draped in a pale dress that looked expensive. She greeted everyone with hugs, her perfume filling the air like a warning. Grant followed behind, his eyes flat, his smile a formality. He sat beside me without a word. Conversation drifted from small talk to stories about the past. Mom asked Lara about the house, and for a while, she performed as usual, flashing that perfect grin. Then she turned toward me, her tone light but sharp. "You're so quiet, Marin," she said. "Still wrapped up in all that sadness?" The table went still. Mom frowned at her, but didn't speak. Lara leaned closer. "I just mean you've got to move on eventually. It's been, what, a year? People can't live in the past forever." Her words landed like ice water. I looked at her, really looked. The flawless skin, the perfect manicure, the glint of desperation behind her eye. Something in me clicked into place. My hands stopped shaking. My voice came out steady. "You're right," I said. "People can't live in the past. Especially people who build their future on lies." Her smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I reached into my bag and placed a few folded papers on the table. Grant froze. Mom's hand hovered halfway to her glass. "You might want to explain these," I said quietly. "Loan applications, fake pay stubs, your signature written twice in different handwriting." Color drained from her face. "You went through my things?" she hissed. "I didn't need to," I said. "The bank and the housing agency already have copies. Turns out it's a serious crime to forge financial documents." Grant pushed his chair back slowly. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice low. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I continued, calm and clear. "You told everyone he got a promotion. You lied to your own husband, to Mom, to the neighbors. You even bragged about things you never paid for." Mom whispered, "Lara, tell me she's wrong." But Lara didn't answer. Grant stood, shaking his head. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "You've lied about everything." He walked out without looking back. The room was silent except for the faint clink of silverware from another table. Mom sat staring at her napkin. Lara looked at me with wide, trembling eyes, the mask finally gone. I picked up my coat and stood. "You called my grief dramatic," I said softly. "Now you know what real drama looks like." Then I left her sitting there, surrounded by the wreckage she had built with her own hands. News of the investigation spread faster than I expected. First came the call from a reporter asking for a statement. Then whispers reached the neighborhood she had tried so hard to impress. People who once admired her stopped returning her calls. The flawless version of Lara began to vanish piece by piece, like paint peeling off cheap walls. Her house went on the market within a month. The glossy for sale sign stood crooked on the lawn, half the flowers dead in their planters. Grant moved into an apartment across town while the divorce papers waited for signatures. I saw him once outside the grocery store. He looked lighter, though his eyes carried the kind of tired that doesn't fade easily. We didn't talk long, but there was understanding in the brief silence between us. Meanwhile, Mom kept calling me, trying to smooth everything over. "She's still your sister," she said over and over. "Family should forgive." I didn't argue. I let her talk, let her fill the air with excuses. But something in me had already closed. Forgiveness requires a pulse of trust, and mine was gone. Then one evening my phone rang. Her name flashed across the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity made me answer. Her voice was shaky, thinner than I remembered. "Marin, please. I don't know what to do. They're saying I could lose everything." "I can't." Her breath caught on the other end. "I've learned my lesson. I swear I have. You're the only one who can help me." For a moment, I heard the same tone she used to use when we were kids, when she'd ask me to cover for her after she broke something, knowing I always would. The part of me that once rushed to fix things twitched, just slightly. Then I remembered the cold words she had spoken the week I buried my child. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse her. I simply said, "You called my daughter's funeral a minor event." There was silence. Not a word, not even breathing. I could almost hear her realization sinking in, the distance she'd built, the pain she had dismissed, the weight of everything she had lost because she couldn't see past herself. I waited a few seconds more, then ended the call. Afterward, I sat by the window. The night was still, the streetlights humming quietly. I thought about how many times I had wished for this moment, her world collapsing, her voice finally trembling. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like release, like something heavy had finally fallen away from me. I didn't call her again. I didn't check what happened next. I didn't need to. The silence between us was enough. It said everything words couldn't. Spring came slowly that year. The trees outside my window started to show small green buds, and the air carried that faint smell of rain and new beginning. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd noticed something as simple as weather. Time had moved strangely after everything, not in days or weeks, but in long, uneven stretches of silence. I visited the cemetery one morning, early enough that the grass was still wet with dew. The path was quiet except for the sound of birds overhead. I brought fresh flowers, white tulips this time. Ellie had always liked them because she said they looked happy. I knelt beside the small stone that bore her name, tracing the letters with my fingertips. There were no tears left, just a deep ache that had learned to stay quiet. For a while, I just sat there, listening to the wind move through the trees. I told her about the garden I wanted to build, how I'd finally decided to leave the old house. The place where she used to play had become too heavy, filled with memories that didn't breathe anymore. I'd found a small cottage 2 hours away, simple, quiet, surrounded by space that felt clean. I planned to plant a row of tulips along the fence, one for every year she had lived. Selling the house wasn't easy, but when I handed over the keys, I didn't feel regret. The walls had held too much sorrow, too many ghosts of conversations that should have gone different. Starting over didn't erase what had happened, but it gave me room to exist again without being buried under it. In the new town, people didn't know my story. They greeted me with warmth but didn't ask questions. I spent my mornings walking along a trail by the lake, my evenings tending to the small patch of soil that would become Ellie's garden. The quiet no longer felt like punishment. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, I'd imagine her there, her laughter carried in the wind, her footsteps soft in the grass. I didn't speak her name out loud as often anymore, but everything I did was for her. Every seed I pressed into the dirt, every color I chose for the flowers, felt like a promise kept. People talk about revenge like it's fire, something that burns until it consumes everything. For me, it wasn't fire at all. It was ice melting after a long winter, slow, deliberate, inevitable. It didn't bring joy. It brought space. It gave me back the part of myself that had been stolen. As the sun began to rise behind the trees, I stood, brushed the dirt from my hands, and looked at the small stone one last time before leaving. For the first time since Ellie's last breath, I could finally breathe again. Hey besties, thanks for staying with me through this story. Life can twist in ways we never expect. Losing someone you love, being betrayed by family, finding power in silence. But sometimes, when everything breaks apart, that's when we finally find ourselves again. If this story touched you, make sure to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. See you in the next one. Bye.